Check one, two, three. Check, check, check. Hey, y'all. Okay. I'm just over here fixing my, I'm over here fixing my YouTube stream to see if it's gonna work. I don't know. Okay. Hey, y'all. I need people on YouTube. Come on. Can you guys hear me on? Oh, you can hear me? Okay. Okay. Can you still hear me? Can you still hear me? Check, 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 check. Hey, everybody on Instagram. Hey, everybody on YouTube. Awesome. It looks like everything is working. Oh, forgot one thing. And I meant to do this last time. So this time I'm ready, people. Okay. I've got my Instagram feed, I've got my YouTube feed, and I've got my Young recording device so that there will be audio for all of my people who don't get on YouTube. So let's see. Is that recording? Check, check, check. Might need to turn that up just a little bit. Oh, it is up. Check, check, check. 1, 2. All right. I know I got rid of the other nails because not going to see the nail tech. So had to do something here. So I don't know why it's saying that my audio bitrate is low. How is the sound quality? Sound quality here. Okay, maybe there's something I can do to. Nope, nothing I can do here. Okay. I'm asking people on YouTube how the sound quality is because um, YouTube be acting really funny sometimes. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, while I'm waiting. Oh, awesome. Everything is good. Thank you, Ariel Rose. Okay. Thank you, Metalhead Mommy. So, if this is your first time tuning in to my live tarot reading, you all need to know that this is more like a tarot sermon. And so I have a propensity to get a little bit preachy, and today is no different. Um, let's see, what time is it? I've got about 9 minutes. So I'm probably going to take two people from Instagram and two people from YouTube to pull just one card for you. So thank you all for giving me that feedback on YouTube. So if you would like me to pull a single card for you, please raise your hand. Oh, you know what? See, I love you, Maddie Cole, but I be trying not to do this for people who have got it done before or people who have gotten readings for me. So please let it be that you have never gotten a card pulled for me, and please let it be that you have never had a reading with me. I'm really trying to give people another chance. Okay. Okay, where are we at here? Let's see. Sada Liz and Metalhead Mommy from Instagram. So I don't even know what this name is. Uh, oops. Sad A Liz, Sada Liz. This one is for you. I see y'all on YouTube. I'm coming. Tincture Inc. Hello. Okay. Sada Liz. Fool on the bottom and the Seven of Pentacles. That's for Sada Liz on Instagram. So it looks like you've recently taken a risk. I don't know if you've quit your job, left a relationship, moved across the country. You've recently taken a risk that maybe you didn't plan for. Um, and it is one where you are just open to possibility and seeing where the road leads you. I have a feeling, thank you all for your compliments. I have a feeling that this may be out of character for you, Sada Liz, or maybe not something that you would normally do. And the Seven of Pentacles is telling you that you really just need to chill and don't be eager to make another change so soon. Give this one time to actually take root. A lot of times when we don't see immediate results from actions that we take, we feel like they were ineffective. And so, Sad A Liz, I don't know if I'm saying that right on Instagram, this is saying that you need to cultivate some patience, and uncertainty is part of the path that you kind of have chosen for yourself. So give your new seeds that you've planted in your life a little bit more time to take root before you bounce off to something else. Okay, this is for Metalhead Mommy on Instagram. And let's see. Who am I going to pull for on YouTube? You're welcome, Sad A Liz. This is for Metalhead Mommy. I'm going to get to YouTube in a minute, waiting for other people to show up. Please share this as a link with your friends. This will be available on YouTube to stream indefinitely. And if this audio recording works out right correctly, it'll also be available for audio streaming and download like a podcast. So, yeah. All right. So let's see here. How did I end up back there? Metalhead Mommy. Chariot and the Devil. Okay. All right, Metalhead Mommy. Now, this Chariot card is, I'm going to just be real and tell you what the first thing that came to my mind. And some of this is because I resonate with these cards very personal, Metalhead Mommy on Instagram, is that you have been working overtime diligently to work through some issues in your life. I don't know if it's related to past trauma, relationship problems with family members, internal scars and wounding. And you have been, focused on working through it. And the Chariot is telling me that at some point it's just been really difficult for you and that you've wanted to give up, but you also know that you can't really give up because you can't go back and undo all of the work that you've done. And so the Devil is saying that if at this moment you're feeling triggered, you're feeling like the burden of the work is getting too heavy, don't give up. You've come too far to go back. So don't go back, but just know that even though you may still be dealing with certain emotional issues and trauma, that is not evidence that your work was in vain. Your capacity to recognize and become aware of what you've been through, as well as aware of when you're being triggered, is evidence of growth. Remember that. Don't give up, Metalhead Mommy. I hope that resonates with you. Okay, on Hey Limited Edition. Okay, let's see here. On Winter's Here. Well, then Metalhead Mommy, then this reading today is about to be on point. Okay, two people from YouTube. Let's see. Kate Carson and Kate Carson and Honey Plate. So let's go with Kate Carson first on YouTube. This is for you. Next time, I've only picked two people this time. So, next time I do it will be a new moon reading in a couple weeks. Come early and then you won't miss out. Okay, this is for Kate Carson on YouTube. We've got the Magician on the bottom and we've got the Ace of Swords. All right, Kate Carson, you have been pulling together your words and trying to have clarity of mind about something. This Magician is about the will to really communicate effectively and articulately. Oh, thank you so much, the Literary Revolutionary. You guys giving me so much love. Thank you so much for joining Saturday and for tuning in. But this is for Kate Carson on YouTube. We've got the Magician on the bottom and the Chariot, I'm sorry, the Ace of Wands drawn. This is all about speaking your truth. This is all about telling the truth. This is all about being confident in yourself, that you have the capacity to really articulate your truth. If there is something that you've been wanting to write, a letter that you've been wanting to send, a text message, an email, something that you've been holding in, now is the time to speak up and use your words. Don't be afraid of conflict. When you are decisive and confident in your spirit and in your words, it's inevitably going to upset some other people, but that is okay because this is something that you know you need to do or say. This is all about confidence and finally gathering up the courage and the strength to speak and tell your truth to yourself or other people. Do it, boo. Okay, lastly, this is for Honey Plate. Thank you so much, Sherelle. I think that's what that is with the XHRELL. Thank you so much, everyone. You guys are so generous and so kind, and I'm just so grateful and happy that you guys are all here. This is for Honey Plate. This will be the last single card draw, and then we're going to get into today's tarot sermon. All right, Honey Plate. We've got the Seven of Wands and the World. All right, you have been persevering and pressing forward, pushing ahead. There's some belief or vision or intention that you've had that you have had. It's almost been like pushing against the wind, and that you've experienced a lot of resistance. What's your name? Honey Plate. You've experienced a lot of resistance, and you have been just so motivated and focused on holding your ground. This is one of those things where you know you don't need people to agree with you, Honey Plate, and that you know that this is something that you're supposed to be doing. There is a deep a deep sense of self-righteousness in this. The world is saying that whatever it is that you've been pushing for, whatever you felt so convicted about, this time is coming to an end. So I don't know if this means that you no longer need to push and press, and that things kind of reach a culmination point where you are ready to move on, or if it's that you are ready to give up the fight. I think it's more of the latter. Oh, you're welcome, Kate Carson. Honey Plate, I think it's more of the latter, that your efforts have not been in vain, and the thing that you've been pressing forward, the conviction that you have been rooted in, the calling, it even seems that you have been persevering and answering. Your moment is now, Honey Plate. And that's all I have to say. I am so ready to talk about this full moon. It was already on my spirit after the We Gonna Be Alright panel on Saturday. If you missed that panel that was hosted, facilitated, and pulled together by the lovely It's Juju Bay, you missed out, but that's okay. It's on YouTube, on It's Juju Bay's page on YouTube. The link is in my bio, I believe, on Instagram. If you missed it, let me just tell you, Black women are powerful. And I even stray away from saying magical, as if we are other, that in order for us to embrace our power as Black women, that we have to be superhuman. No, we are the original human, right? So if you missed that, please go to YouTube, put it in your queue, you're to watch later. Timeless wisdom for now, for the future, for the past, for the present, for every moment. You guys' feedback is so wonderful. Because of that, though, so many new followers, so many new people who need the opportunity to take advantage of the healing offerings that I serve you guys with. Use the code We Gon' Be Alright between now and April 15th to get 15% off any 30 or 60-minute reading with me. So 30-minute readings are 30-minute tarot, dream interpretation, question and answer, astrology. I think that's it. And then 60-minute readings are foundational sidereal birth chart reading, forecasting and prediction, Saturn return reading, tropical versus sidereal comparison reading, and 1 hour tarot reading. All of those are the 60-minute readings. I'll put the code in my in the description of the video on YouTube. but it is also a post on my Instagram page. So it's also a post in my media on Twitter. If you don't follow me there, it's okay. It's not too late. I'm at People's Oracle everywhere. So definitely do that. If you missed out on me drawing a single card today, come early next time. Um, and I will likely be drawing cards again for a couple people who show up. Thank you, Psalm of Shar. You guys just really keep me going here. It's rough. Today I was like, I don't have no mojo, but in honoring Saturn, I decided that there were 3 things on my list that I was going to do today. One of them was to take a bath, which I've done. Another was to do this reading, which I'm doing now. And the other one was to send out charts to all of my clients for who have readings this week. So today we are talking about generational trauma and gifts at this full moon in Virgo. If you are new, it's okay. I use the Sidereal Zodiac exclusively. I do not use any asteroids. I do not use any outer planets because I really don't need them. No shade to the people that do. They're a little bit extra and too much because I'm a minimalist, and that's okay. But don't be asking me questions about no outer planets or asteroids because I can't help you with that. There are other people whose expertise that is. So in talking about generational trauma and gifts, Spirit always confirms. I told somebody that the other day on Twitter that if it is not confirmed, then it is not spirit. There is no way that you uniquely hold some revelation or vision that is not confirmed, because the spirit that reveals something to you is the same spirit that reveals something to me, right? It's all one. And so yesterday I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts called This Jungian Life. And it's 3 Jungian analysts who look at different topics through, 3 Jungian analysts who look through at various topics through the lens of depth psychology or Jungian analysis. And they were talking about ancestors. And that was just kind of the confirmation that this is what we needed to talk about today. And within the context of the full moon in Virgo, what we're really talking about is evidence. We're talking about the things that we have physical evidence for, things that we can logically make sense of, things that we can draw judgments from because we go through this step-by-step logic. Pause. Melanin Bliss asked me, can I type the podcast? There is no podcast. It'll just be on my website, thepeoplesoracle.com. There is no podcast. Oh, the podcast of that I just mentioned. Sorry, This Jungian Life. Jennifer Pooley just typed it. Sorry. They were talking about ancestry and this kind of obsession we have at this moment of knowing our origin stories and where we come from. And one of the things that struck me quite interestingly that kind of led to me wanting to talk about this today was that they talked about how often when we ask our ancestors who are, the generation that have immigrated here because of war or catastrophe or trauma, or who are still in the midst of trauma, they often kind of rebuff our questions. The drive to assimilate to the dominant culture, at least here in America, and I'm assuming elsewhere as well, is enough to make them want to forget, because remembering where they come from is painful because of the trauma, as well as actually still living in it for some people, meaning that what's up, Saru? Speak up. Yes. Excuse my child. Still got a parent, even though I'm on camera. Yes, but they were talking about how often when we asked our parents or our grandparents about their personal histories or their family histories, they don't remember, they intentionally forget, or maybe it's just too traumatic. And so now that many of us are, 2, 3 generations, 4, 5, 6 generations from immigration or from being enslaved or whatever it may be, that we are able to approach our histories and our stories with some measure of detachment, and that in many ways we are really reimagining an origin story for ourselves. And this is really at the root of all ancestral work. This is at the root of all ancestor worship that we're reimagining and re-remembering stories. But what I want to talk about today is the trauma and gifts that no one has spoken to us about. There has been no conversation. There has been no question and answer or interview. There is no written record. There is no audio recording. There is no Bible with the dates of births and deaths and all of these things, right? That we don't have the evidence, the tangible evidence of our lineage, of our heritage. And this is really Virgo, that Virgo says, well, the chicken walked across the road and there was a car coming. The chicken is dead because the car came, right? The logic of that makes really, really so much sense. But when it comes to trauma and gifts, that kind of logic often does not work. It's not functional, it's not useful. And so at the full moon in Pisces, thank you. At the full moon in Pisces, the full moon in Virgo, we're at, the sun is in Pisces. And Mercury is also in Pisces, which really is about how our bodies remember, that our bodies know, even when we don't have the language, we don't have the statistics, we don't have the data, we don't have the research and the analysis to prove to us that there was some trauma or that there was some special gift or talent. And so I wanted to make sure to talk both about gifts and trauma, because we often talk about trauma, right? Kind of in a trauma porn kind of way. We always are often talking about trauma and the evidence of our personal traumas and histories and the evidence of generational traumas that we might have direct access to. Yes, it will be on YouTube, Ambrosia the Nectar. So I'm interested today at this full moon. I am interested in the trauma and the gifts that no one has affirmed for you verbally. There's no research or DNA or genetic code that you can look to give you proof, but that your life, your being, how you interact in relationships, the spiritualities that you feel called to, the hobbies and things that bring you joy, the places around you that you feel drawn to, all of these things are evidence of both generational trauma and generational gifts, right? That in order to fully comprehend the breadth of what you have inherited from your lineage, it requires you to sometimes abandon these quantitative measures that don't tell the whole story, right? So in this vein, I'm asking you to really think about, what does your life offer you evidence of? One of the things that was really interesting was they were talking about alcoholism and how eventually, they created a support group just for children of alcoholics, because the behaviors that children of alcoholics adapted in order to survive in a family with an alcoholic gets passed down from generation to generation, even if there are no more alcoholics in the family. So when we think about our parents who have been victimized by abuse from the state or from their parents or from a trusted caregiver or an adult, and the ways that they internalize and are shaped by that, and how that means they raise you, right? That it may not be that they actually are abusive towards you in the physical or emotional sense, but that they are withholding or neglectful because they don't have the capacity to embrace the vulnerability required to actually love, right? And so now you weren't ever really abused, but you are an adaptation to your environment. You are an adaptation to emotional neglect. And so how does that inform your relationships, right? And then how does it inform how you raise your children, right? Now, in the context of gifts, I really want to hit this home because I don't think that this is encouraged enough. In capitalism, everything is meant to be qualified, quantified, and monetized. And I didn't mean quantified, I meant commodified. Right? In capitalism, everything is commodified and a dollar value is put to it. And so we often devalue or don't recognize those gifts or callings that don't have a market value. But these are necessarily our genetic and generational inheritance of gifts. It's so important that you learn to feel and honor the draw that pulls you towards certain things, because this is evidence of generational gifts, right? Generational gifts aren't always, well, I was good at this, so you should be good at this, right? Let's strip away the capitalist framing that really says that a gift is something that can be commodified, that has market value. If we are going to have conversations about generational trauma, if we're going to have conversations about the codependency and triangulation and the reparenting that's so hip right now, we also need to have a conversation about generational gifts, that we miss opportunities for joy. And so importantly at this moment, when so many of the aspects of capitalism have come to a screeching halt, it's so important that we reconnect with the intangible knowing that offers us evidence of trauma, that leads us to healing, but also offers us evidence of gifts that lead us to greater fulfillment and a deeper sense of purpose in this world. This goes for our relationships as well, that we get stuck in this Virgo sense. And I'm using Virgo, yes, because the full moon is in Virgo, but also as a representation of a worldview or an adaptation or a way of approaching things. That the Virgo way of approaching things is, well, what does the data say? What does the science say? What does the research say? 1 step, 2 step, 3 step leads to 4 step. A plus B equals C, so on and so forth. That we're looking at the apparent evidence and often miss the implied evidence, even in our relationships. That when we are trying to quantify things like love and belonging and safety, that yes, the external, quantifiable, measurable aspects of those things are so important, but the intangible as well, right? That we are really learning how to know from a place that we may not have experience knowing from. Mostly because our culture only values knowing from a tangible, quantifiable place. If you have my 2020 Sidereal Astrology guide, there is in the back of the guide, listed by month, fill in the blanks for each astrological event that's in the calendar. You can download that or order a printed and bound copy. I think it's still up. I might put it back up if I took it down and put it on sale for y'all. But for the full moon in Virgo in the month of April, the fill in the blank said, remembering the limits of logic. Right? Remembering the limits of logic. As you are trying to make sense of the world and understand what's going on in your life in this grand moment that we're all in, remember the limits of logic. Remember the limits of quantifiable knowing. Remember the limits of numbers. I know we're all obsessed with the death toll of this and this and this and that. Those numbers aren't true. They're not. If you have that much trust in the federal government or in any government to properly count, to be going to homes, knocking door to door, to count the dead, who never made it to the hospital, who never got a test, those people aren't counted, right? We must learn to know without needing evidence. This is what the new world calls for us. That we need to learn how to know, to trust our intangible knowing, our instinctual knowing, our intuitive knowing. So with that being said, stop running my mouth. I'm going to take a sip of my matcha latte here. haven't had one of those in months. And I'm going to draw some cards. As always, the card on the bottom is the context for this full moon. Full moons are culminations. Full moons are apex points in a story. They're not the end of the story. So this particular full moon in Virgo goes back to the new moon in Virgo, which was September. Hey, Khalil. The new moon in Virgo was September 28th, 2020, which, if you've seen my video on Saturn death and all that stuff that's on YouTube, you'll know that my astrological timeline for the emergence of the coronavirus actually goes back to September. And since I've done that video, there has been more and more evidence that's come out that this is the case. I know of at least one case where someone who had gotten sick early in January got a hold of one of those antigen or antibody tests, and that person actually tested positive for the antibodies. So there's so many people who got sick before they started testing and counting. And so this moment really marks an important culmination and peak in the whole series of this pandemic. We're far from the end, but I think from this point forward, the evidence beyond what we are counting and quantifying is too much to ignore. So I don't know what these cards are going to talk to us about. Let's see here. All right, the card on the bottom is Temperance. Oh man, this is such an important card for a kind of dealing with and embodying Pisces as a sign or as a perspective, right? Hey, a rainy day. The Temperance card is so important to Pisces, where the Sun and Mercury are at this full moon, because part of what Pisces is about is properly judging what it is that we feel instinctively and what we feel intuitively. That at its root, Pisces is about the fact that our physical bodies and all of the processes that are internal, the sensations that we feel, have their own kind of biological function, right? Our stomach growls when we're hungry. We salivate when it's time to eat. You know, we feel this way when we're tired, etc. These are the internal processes of being in a body, and that's Cancer. But Pisces teaches us that those same kind of sensations and mechanisms can give us messages and teach us about the world outside of us. That our own physical sensations, feelings, and knowings can teach us about what other people are feeling, right? They give us a sense, that intangible knowing. But the Temperance card really wants us to rein it in and say not everything means something, right? Temperance is about finding moderation. Often call it the don't make a mountain out of a molehill card, right? That properly judging and valuing what it is that we perceive or know with our bodies is so important, because we can get carried away. And I think it's important because we tend to personalize everything. That if I'm feeling something, right, because I feel it from another person, it's very hard not to take that personally and be like, well, that's because of me, right? But at the same time, those of us who tend to be less intuitive and cut off from our instinct because of whatever experience, right? The Temperance card is saying sometimes it does mean something. And it's important to investigate and interrogate the conclusions that you draw about that. So let's see why we're drawing the Temperance card. 5 of Swords. I already know where this is going. 10 of Swords. Maybe not. And the World. Okay. So we got the Tower. I'm sorry, Temperance on the bottom. 5 of Swords. Ten of Swords. Hey, Yaya Simone on YouTube and the world. All right. Um, oh, I did this backwards. Five of Swords first. All right. I really love the Five of Swords, especially in this deck. This is the Golden Thread Tarot. I love this in this deck because other renditions of this card tend to focus so much on conflict as this bitter thing. But I love the Five of Swords in this deck because it talks about the necessity of conflict. That, what is going on? That oftentimes we can't take into consideration the judgments and opinions of other people, and that it's important that we cut through the mental noise in the form of other people's voices, judgments, and opinions to get to the heart of our own truth, right? I think this connects back so wonderfully to the Temperance card because this whole moment is like, but is there evidence for it? Do we have the data, right? What's the logic of this thing, right? And the Five of Swords is like, ain't no data, ain't no logic. The only evidence to the truth that you have is your own knowing, right? And that you must learn to develop a relationship with spirit that allows you to rightly discern the confirmation that inevitably comes, not because other people agree with you and they tell you you did a good job, but it's often from kind of unexpected places that you get that confirmation. And so this is explicitly saying that this intangible knowing that you're cultivating and coming into awareness of, whether it's around the generational trauma and gifts that we talked about earlier, or whatever it is, that if your knowing relies on other people's thoughts or ideas to validate you, this is saying cut it out. When you are coming into knowing of generational trauma that you have been shaped by, that your mother, your grandmother, great grandmother has been shaped by, what makes you think that they're going to be keen on acknowledging it? Right? Ten of Swords. These are such a pair because this card is really hard to do. This is very difficult to do. It is very difficult to have a single-minded sense of purpose in cutting through to your personal truth that does not rely on the validation of other people. This is the very definition of faith, this, right? Evidence of things not seen, right? And this is not in the hope, prosperity gospel sense. This is in the sense that things aren't always going to make sense to other people. Things aren't always going to, people aren't going to agree with you. People aren't going to get the same revelation as you. Confirmation comes from somewhere, but when you're breaking the cycle and you're pushing through, it's not going to come from the very people who have been kind of blindly living and reproducing the traumatic behavior. And the people who never had the opportunity and the privilege to exercise the generational gifts that even came through them to you. They're just not the people that are going to confirm you, and that's okay. That really is okay. This Ten of Swords card is the card of beating a dead horse of, I think really in this case too, it is the card of self-flagellation and self-judgment. I always think of the swords in this deck of like, when you're dealing with emotional stuff, it's like filtering water, right? When you're working through emotional issues, it's like straining and filtering water. And you start with the big sieve, the big strainer to just get out the chunks, the obvious stuff, right? The obvious stuff that you've inherited or carried, right? And that's usually the trauma or the difficulty that the trauma and the difficulty uh, that comes from our direct interfacing, with abuse or neglect or whatever it is, right? Um, and those are the easier things to deal with. Easier as in comparison to the other stuff, right? But then we get the more fine sieve, the more fine filter that starts to filter out and make apparent all of these other things that we weren't necessarily aware of, right? That we weren't necessarily, they weren't obvious or face value. But once we put it through the sieve, it's obvious now that this was there. And we're like, man, no wonder this water was nasty. Oof, right? That all of these other things were murkying kind of your emotional waters, your inherited stuff, right? And then we get to the real refining process where we're boiling off stuff and chemical filtration, right? That's when it gets really hard, because at first glance, it's nothing wrong with the water. You dealt with the surface issues, you got the big rocks out or the clunks of whatever, and you're good, right? This card is really admonishing us, very similar to something that I mentioned when I was pulling cards for someone earlier. The work is never really done. Healing is a multi-step, lifelong process, and you never get to healed. You get to different stages of wellness, different phases of wellness, different phases of healing. That if there's nothing to work through, then why are you even here, right? And I just want to hit home that for those of you who really do feel like you were working so hard and diligently through your stuff, through other people's stuff, especially in 2019, right? That you were understanding the ways in which your personality and your adaptations were really an adaptation to trauma, to the toxic environments that you were raised in, to the not so obviously difficult circumstances of your upbringing, right? That I know so many of us felt like we made huge strides in that regard in 2019. And then we get to 2020 and this whole coronavirus pandemic happens, and it feels like we got stopped in our tracks, or we have to go back on our antidepressants or our mood stabilizers or our anti-anxiety or anti-nausea medications, right? This does not mean that your work or efforts are in vain. And this does not mean that you deserve to be punished or that you've done something wrong. It just means that it is what it is. Your work doesn't stop. Your work is recognizing when you need to go back on the meds. There is no award for suffering through mental illness. There's no reward for depression and toughening it out, right? Now, thank you, JB Photos. Here's the world. This is a hopeful thing. And I don't even know. I feel like so much of the swords is about our internal processing and trying to intellectualize things, and the failure of the ineffectiveness of intellectual things, the ineffectiveness of our intellect in solving emotional problems, and sometimes even translating what we perceive or know with our bodies into something tangible. One of the things that Mercury in Pisces teaches us, which is in charge of this full moon in Virgo, is that words inevitably cheapen or put a limit on intangible things. And what I mean by that, and this was the example I gave last year during the Mercury and Pisces transit, that when I'm working on music, right? So last year I had to score some songs for a show that I was working on. And it reminded me so much of Mercury and Pisces in that the sound that I produce with my voice or an instrument is a whole thing in it of themselves. Translating it into notes in music is only an approximation that I'm never going to fully articulate on a piece of paper with notes and all kind of other directions about tempo and volume and ornaments, right? I'm never going to fully translate that into, I'm never going to fully translate what I hear in my mind or the sound that I can make with an instrument into notes that fully embodies the sound I'm trying to create. That something is always going to get lost in translation, right? And I think that this full moon is teaching us that it's okay. It's okay that some things get lost in translation. It's okay that some things not be verbalized, that your knowing of it, your being in it and experiencing it is the evidence, all the evidence that you need. Ooh, I love that. I am Rev I said, especially the English language, which is not ours. Yes, 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 yes. I spoke about this last year, maybe around the same time when Mercury was in Pisces, about how uh, language is such a shaper of reality, right? That the language that we have, the syntax, is never divorced from culture. It's never divorced from history. It's never, ever divorced from politics and economics, right? That the language we possess to talk about ourselves, to think about ourselves. I just mentioned this last week where the language of capitalism is inherently violent and inhumane. Capitalism is a belief system. And so any language that exists within that belief system and exists within that culture is going to be inhumane. It's going to be violent because the doctrine is violent. That all things are commodified. That you are only as good as your able-bodied labor makes you be. That your able-bodied labor is the only thing that matters in this. And if you can take advantage of somebody else's able-bodied labor as a means to your own acquisition of wealth, more than good. But we see very clearly now that that language is ineffective. When it comes through working through trauma and dealing with generational gifts, the language that requires us to quantify and commodify everything, right, is absolutely not the right tool for the job. And I feel like that's really here in these cards as well. This language of lazy, this language of what are you even tired for? You haven't done nothing. Why does fatigue or tiredness only come from labor? What about the labor of dreaming? The labor of processing? What about the labor of being in a hyper vigilant survival state where your sympathetic nervous system is activated, just sitting in your home because should you have to leave the house, you don't know what you're going to encounter? What about the labor of maintaining connections with people when you don't even feel like getting out of the bed, to be honest, right? This moment is so much about crafting a new language, one that does not rely on capitalist ideology. Language inevitably imparts value. If other people have limited language skills, and I don't mean they're stupid and they don't speak English. If other people have limited language skills, meaning their only reference point for thinking about, communicating about, writing about themselves, you, the world around us, is posited in a capitalist mind frame, what do you think that they're going to know about generational trauma? Unless you can put it in a webinar for $500. I really don't be meaning to drag people. I'm just being honest. The fact of the matter is, we all live in this and we're all trying to survive. But I think the world is hopeful as a culmination, as a graduation point, as in reaching the end of the road, as in using this moment to recognize the limits of your own intellect, the limits of the language that you have inherited in the culture that you live in, to speak truthfully about what you know deep down inside you. Because you're drawn to these things that are inevitably generational gifts, that you are admonished to work through these things that come up as trauma, right? Anything that keeps you separate, that convinces you that you don't belong, that somehow your suffering is unique, that's all sin, all of that. Ask the question, who has a vested interest in you? Who has a vested interest in you not knowing the truth of where you come from? Who has a vested interest in enforcing language standards on you that take away your agency to really talk about your experience? One of the first things that any colonizer or oppressor does is police your language. You don't speak Spanish here. You don't speak insert your indigenous language here. Right? They take your language away. And then they give you theirs. And now their language shapes your worldview. This is why intangible knowing is so important. Because the tools we are given to quantify our own experience is inevitably oppressive, right? When we're talking about what is love, what is safety, what is belonging, right? We need new language for those things. Safety is not you in your box, you in your box, you in your box, me in my box, and all of us in our own boxes with our own beds and kitchens and washing machines. That's old safety, right? What's new safety? What's the language for that, right? Love isn't, we bought a house and a mortgage, I make 2 stacks, he make 3 stacks a week. None of those things are love. And they really can't save you when capitalism is dying, which it has been for a while, but this was just like a straight hack to the knees, right? Even our relationships have been commodified and been shaped by the language of our oppressors. Can you love somebody without creating a YouTube channel to show everyone? No shade, make your money. Do what you have to do. But at the same time, who and what is your love really accountable to? I'm hoping that as a consequence of this new moon, and I'm running out of time on Instagram, so I'm gonna wrap this up, that we feel emboldened to throw away the old metrics for healing, for safety, for belonging, for love, that we throw away the old language and we learn to sit in the experience of what is, and wait for that confirmation that inevitably comes, not because, you know, somebody on YouTube did it, or you know, whatever it may be. We need new language, right? I think that's all I have to say today. I didn't know what this reading was going to be because I'm feeling very, very, very sober. I'm not feeling as heavy as I was earlier, but I'm feeling very sober and just very, despite as much as I talked, very nonverbal. I don't know. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm going to put links to the This Jungian Life podcast, how you can book a reading and use the 15% off code, and link to the We Gonna Be Alright panel. All of that I'll put in the description um, to the video on YouTube. And yeah, it's only Monday, y'all. Happy full moon. It's tomorrow. And I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks with the new moon in Aries video. That will be Wednesday. The new moon in Aries video will be Wednesday. When is it? Wednesday, April 22nd. Okay? I'll probably go live between now and then just to talk to y'all about some stuff. I still need to talk about Venus in Taurus. I haven't forgotten. It's just a really large topic, and so I'll get to it. All right. See you guys.